Sayyid Qutb, The Milestone Process by Paul Sutliff. Let's give credit where credit is due. This section was taken largely from Stephen Coughlin's Catastrophic Failure, Blindfolding America in the Face of Jihad, published by the Center for Security Policy in 2015. If you have not bought this book, it's an absolute must-buy if you are serious in your desire to learn more about the Muslim Brotherhood. Permission to reprint sections of this book and Coughlin's conclusions were granted. We cannot understand extremist Islam without understanding abrogation, said by Stephen Coughlin in the book Catastrophic Failure. Abrogation comes from Sharia, and this is the process of interpreting the Quran. So the rules of abrogation are based on a couple verses. One says, none of our revelations do. We abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar. Knowest thou not that Allah has power over all things? This is from Surah 2:106. And the next one, when we substitute one revolution for another, and Allah knows best what he reveals in stages, they say, thou art but a forger. But most of them understand not. This is Surah 16:101. Stephen Coughlin talks about the importance of abrogation in the milestone process. So to begin to understand Qutb, you have to understand that the Quran was revealed in portions. What was revealed later could change or negate what was said earlier. This is called abrogation, just like we just said a few seconds ago. Coughlin asks, if this is true, if abrogation is valid as law, and if violent jihadi verses abrogate non-violent verses, then why are not all Islamic entities engaged in violent jihad at all times? This is a very important question he poses, something the FBI, the NSA, DHS, and all the alphabet soup agencies should be discussing today. Consider that Surah 9:5 states, so when the sacred months have passed away, then slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and take them captive, and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in every ambush. Then if they repent and keep up the prayer, and pay the poor rate, which is the jizya, leave their way free to them. Surely Allah is forgiving and merciful. Well, Jasser Auda, a writer for a Muslim Brotherhood entity, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, tells us that this verse is thought to abrogate all peaceful verses. This is really important as we get into this. If Surah 9:5 abrogates all peaceful verses, these are the verses that would be abrogated. Surah 2:256, there shall be no compulsion in religion. Repel evil with that which is best. Surah 23:96. So patiently persevere. Surah 30:60. Do not argue with the people of the book except with means that are best. Surah 29:46. Say you have your religion and I have my religion. Surah 109:6. These verses would be nullified. The only thing left would be violent action. Keep this in mind if Surah 9:5 abrogates all peaceful verses. Coughlin's question is now very important to consider if abrogation is important to understanding Islamic extremism. So why aren't all Muslims partaking in violent jihad? Now here's Coughlin's answer. The reason is that threat doctrine based on abrogation orients the Islamic world through what we call the milestone process. The conceptual framework underlying the milestone process forms both the doctrinal foundation of the threat doctrine and the mechanism which drive decision making. In other words, there are different stages. It's okay for the Muslim Brotherhood to be at one stage. It's okay for the Islamic Jihad group to be at another stage. This is what the milestone process is. It's important to understand what Sayyid Qutb's mission and his understanding were at the time of his writing Milestones. He wrote Milestones during the time he was awaiting his execution in an Egyptian prison. Qutb believed there was a need to call the modern Muslim world to return to the true faith, and he saw many Muslims as having backslidden in their Islamic faith. He uses the term Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah is a term used for the state of ignorance that existed before Islam was revealed to their Prophet Muhammad. This time is viewed as a time of primitive savagery, a time of darkness, a time of no enlightenment. This about Jahiliyyah in the book Milestones. If we look at the sources and foundations of the modern ways of living, it becomes clear that the whole world is steeped in Jahiliyyah, and all the marvelous material comforts and high-level inventions do not diminish this ignorance. This Jahiliyyah is based on the rebellion against Allah's sovereignty on earth. It transfers to man one of the greatest attributes of Allah, namely sovereignty, and makes some men lords over others. It is now not in that simple and primitive of the ancient Jahiliyyah, but takes the form of claiming that the right to create values, to legislate rules of collective behavior, and to choose any way of life rests with men, without regard to what Allah Almighty has prescribed. The result of this rebellion is against the authority of Allah. Now, what is he talking about? He's talking about going against, making rules against Sharia, or these rules were not made as in a consultation type forum. So this would make one person lord over another. This becomes problematic. How can a Muslim government stand up to this if they do not have a form of consultation before laws are made? And that would make most Muslim governments full expression of Jahiliyyah. And this is what Qutb points out. Notes that Fatih Khan confirmed this interpretation of Jahiliyyah in the Islamic Movement, Problems and Perspectives, which is published by American Trust Publications and ISNA Publishing House. ISNA is the Islamic Society of North America, and ISNA is a Muslim Brotherhood entity in the United States. According to this book, Jahiliyyah applies to all non-Islamic cultures and influences, including modern secular society, and then declared that Islam is a call to a revolution against the manifestation of Jahiliyyah life in all forms. It is a revolution against the Jahiliyyah life in all shapes and forms. It is a revolution against the Jahiliyyah laws and legislation. It combines Jahiliyyah and shirk. Again, shirk is polytheism. This is important to understand, and it explains the vast importance of the concept of Jahiliyyah to terrorist and the Muslim Brotherhood entity. This is what Qutb says in Milestones. The association with God has been either in belief and worship or in accepting the sovereignty of others besides God. Both of these aspects are shirk in the sense that they take human beings away from the religion of God, which was brought by the prophets. After each prophet, there was a period during which people understood this religion, but then gradually later generations forgot it and returned to Jahiliyyah. They started again in the way of shirk, sometimes in their belief and worship, and sometimes in their submission to the authority of others, and sometimes in both. This is extremely important. Again, to Muslims, shirk is unforgivable. So if you put unforgivable and Jahiliyyah together, we've got a whole other ball of wax problems. And you have to pay real close attention as things develop now. So what have we said? In Islam, creating legislative laws are an act of shirk. So why are Muslims trying to become legislators, politicians in Western society? This is important to consider, because if creating legislative laws are an act of shirk, why are they doing this? It is to promote Islamism, to promote Sharia. That is the ultimate reason that they get involved in making legislative laws. Now, it's also true that Qutb talks about Islam cannot accept or agree to a situation which is half Islam and half Jahiliyyah, again, separated from God. Again, you have to ask yourself, why are Muslims trying to get involved in politics if they believe these things? It is to change the government to accept Sharia. That is their sole purpose. And this is extremely important to understand today. So what happens when we combine Jahiliyyah and abrogation? Abrogation, again, is such a powerful concept in Islam that Qutb and others viewed the revelation of Allah to Muhammad as being in stages. This message would change to reflect the evolved and evolving circumstances. Once a new stage was reached, new revelations would then overrule the previous revelations from previous stages. Equating Jahiliyyah with shirk excuses hatred to a boiling point against all that is not Islam. Now, what are we getting at? If you combine abrogation and Jahiliyyah, think about this. This hatred, this angst against all that is not Allah allows them to act in different stages. So it's okay for the terrorist to act in a certain way because he's at a certain stage. The person who is a civilization jihadist, it's okay for him to act in that manner because that is the stage that he is at in going against Jahiliyyah. And this is what we're talking about, where rules change, where things are delivered differently. Now things get specific here. Each stage continues until a milestone is reached. In other words, at the least the Muslim must hold hatred to all Jahiliyyah, that is not Islam. When a milestone is reached to act on that hatred using deception or lying to promote Islam, that's okay. That stage works until a milestone brings you into another stage. Coughlin says, as Qutb's thinking went, if this is how Allah led the first generation, could there be any better way for today's generation? This is the milestone process. Of course, it's directly aligned with the Islamic concept of progressive revelation, the doctrine of abrogation. From the Islamic perspective, Qutb's reasoning is powerful and persuasive. Milestone establishes the doctrinal baseline that permits synchronization both with the Muslim Brotherhood as well as across the entire Salafi jihadi spectrum, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Given this information, what is Qutb's concept of an end stage? What does he think of the perfect, final stage if you're at the end of the milestone process? And this is what he has to say. Whenever an Islamic community exists, which is a concrete example of the divinely ordained system of life, once it's gotten to the top of the milestones, it has a God-given right to step forward and take control of the political authority so that it may establish the divine system on earth, while it leaves the matter of belief to individual conscience. When God restrained Muslims from jihad for a certain period, it was a question of strategy rather than of principle. This was a matter pertaining to the requirements of the movement and not to belief. Only in the light of this explanation can we understand those verses of the Holy Quran which are concerned with the various stages of this movement.